What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Dr. Nikki Coleman, so wild. Dr. Nikki Coleman, speaker, lecturer, degreed doctor, expert. Not that we're necessarily subjecting ourselves or submitting to white institutions to validate understanding or expertise. At the same time, we live in a context where having certain credentials lets you know that you at least know something about what you're talking about. At the same time, though, as I say this, there do be people out there with doctors who don't know what they're talking about. All that being said, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. Think about all the space and time, all the spaces and context we've shared together. You started as my therapist, then you were the host of an incredible show that got featured in Forbes written by Dr. Janice Gassam, called The Break Room. And then, we just continue to be friends. Dr. Coleman,
yes.
How are you?
Hello. I am moving into a place where I can honestly say I'm doing good. This year has been enormously challenging. But I think I'm coming out on the other side of all the challenges. So I'm happy about that. I am actually exceptionally proud of how I've managed all of the challenges of this year. So we just keep pushing.
Look, it's a pleasure and honor to be here with you and to have you on Living Corporate yet again. Not only as a friend of Living Corporate, but as a friend to me. This is going to get released a little bit later, so we'll probably people will probably be hearing this conversation sometime in like January, February-ish. So I do want to talk a bit about this concept of invisible disability, right? We have a lot of, and I've said this before. We had a therapist on some time ago, and we were talking about the same idea. And like I can say, of all the different dimensions of lived experience that Living Corporate has not done a good job of highlighting and centering and amplifying, it's definitely been disability. And then if I was to double down on that, it's certainly been invisible disability, right? I think as we just think about conceptually, when we talk about invisible disability, what does that mean to you as a degree certified expert? Living Corporate is brought to you by Rosetta Stone, the most trusted language learning program. It's incredible. Okay, so first off, you didn't know, Rosetta Stone is a trusted expert for over 30 years with millions of users and 25 languages offered. They have fast language acquisition, meaning you're actually going to pick up the language because it's going to provide an immersive experience for you through their program. Speech recognition gives you a trainer for your accent. Convenient, right? You can use it on your computer. You can use it on your phone. Incredible value. Lifetime membership has all languages for any and all trips or language needs in life. That's lifetime access to 25 language courses Rosetta Stone's offers for 50% off. That's a steal, y'all. So don't put off learning that language. There's no better time than right now to get started. For a limited time, Living Corporate listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/today. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/today today. Shifting my wardrobe from summer to fall is always a challenge. Luckily, Quint offers timeless and high-quality items I adore, ensuring my wardrobe stays fresh and I don't blow my budget. Like cashmere sweaters from $50, pants for every occasion, washable silk tops, and so much more. The best part, all Quint items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories, Quint cuts the cost of the middleman and passes on the savings to us. And Quint only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. I love that. Listen, I really have enjoyed the cashmere sweaters I've gotten, as well as a pair of pants, and I'm going to tell you, they are matched right with all the quality of the other things that I've purchased. It's been great. Make switching seasons a breeze with Quince's high-quality closet essentials. Go to quince.com/corp for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/corp to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/corp.
Yes. So when we talk about invisible disabilities, we're talking about all the ways in which you want to engage in the world as it is set up currently, but you don't have the same level of internal capacity, resources, access to the same sort of structures internally to be able to meet the demands of the world as it is structured, right? But it doesn't look, quote unquote, like you don't have those same internal resources, capacities, skills, etc. Right? And most of the time, the vast majority of what we call invisible disabilities are things that are cognitive, they're neurological, they're neuropsychological, or chronic illness, right? So there are things that we don't readily see when we just meet someone. And we have done a really horrible job with ableism in this country of really sort of limiting ability, first of all, like dichotomizing ability versus disability. And then secondarily, like focusing on physical, observable differences that you can sort of see materially as justified disabilities.
So let's talk about that. That language is it's new to me. Talk to me about justified, and I guess if I can engage in a binary versus unjustified disability.
Yes. Yeah. And that's sort of my languaging around it. I will give an example. I was on the university committee years ago at the beginning of my career for academic accommodations for students on campus. And I remember sitting in those meetings horrified often that like of the way that students were talked about, on the way it was like so much begrudging negotiation around like how much of an impact is this, right? Because that's sort of the ADA definition, right? What is the undue impact of the disability on their ability to perform, right? And just there was one person on the committee that's be like, just why can't we have just a ramp, right? Meaning someone in a wheelchair, someone that needed ramp access, like give me the ramp cases because these other cases are like, ugh. And yes, that face. And I was, this is me, 28. No, I think I was 30 when I started 30-year-old, like third year as an assistant professor, thinking I'm going to like engage in this thoughtful, helpful work. And I was like, oh, y'all in here wilding behind closed doors. Got it, right? So when I use the term justified, I'm using that because oftentimes in institutions, workplaces, what we're doing is trying to set a standard based on what the law requires. And ADA talks about functional limitations, right? And so I think it then sort of distills down to what you can justify. So that's why I was sort of using that word, right? Like it has to be documented. It has to be observable. It has to be verified by somebody with credentials, regardless of what the actual skills, expertise, or competence are, but they got to have the credentials, right? So I think for folks who are missing a limb or who are not able to walk unassisted, folks who have sight or hearing limitations, and even with some hearing limitations, I think that starts to move into the invisible part, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, I can see that we need to make these.
You're obviously different.
And you're obviously different, right? Versus the invisible stuff where, one, we just still have a very stigmatized association around mental health. I still think that I think that sort of rugged individualism around being American, that sort of puritanical hard work is good work sort of thing, is so deeply baked in. You saw what I did? So deeply baked into to like what we
Yeah.
assume, right? And so when we start talking about depression, when we start talking about neurodiversity, when we start talking about chronic illness and impact on fatigue and capacity and all of these things, it's like, but really, because I just muscled through it,
Yeah.
right? Well,
Yeah.
I remember the days before COVID when people would be like, I had the flu, but I came to work anyway. And it's like,
Yeah,
that's
this
not
is
the
not.
facts you
It's
think
not
it
a flex
is.
at all.
Like,
Go home and
go
stay
home.
there until you get all the way better, because we probably don't bathe the same. So you might get me sick. So stop. I'm real. No, really. I've been learning a lot more about like different part of being a parent. I know you're a parent. Part side note, right? But it's connected. But part of being a parent is realizing how different parents think about
Ooh.
cleanliness and bathing their kids and stuff. It's like the conversations that we just overhear or that are volunteered to us is like, yeah, we just don't really bathe. I'm like, hey, man. So you think about those things. So that, and I'm trying to be more systems thinking and like more communal in my thinking. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So my child has to go to daycare with all the other children who have various levels of cleanliness. Then they have to come home, and then like
Yes.
who's to say? Then like my immune system is different. Like we have to be thoughtful about how we're navigating this world. And I agree. Like there's this like Western notions and instilled, frankly, values, because it's a Western value of individualism. It harms us. It
Oh, it's killing us
it's
in the
literally
current.
killing
Like
us.
it.
When I think
Yes.
about
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
and I think it's, and I was literally having a conversation with somebody the other day. It's like, look, I recognize, because of like we have these values that we hold dear, and some of them can exist, but some of them are literally incompatible with the just human nature of like
Yes.
how we exist, right? So like
Yes.
look, you cannot be hyper individualistic when we all have shared roads, shared services. We all are walking and going in the same places. There has to be some degree of consideration and thoughtfulness for other people around you, right? There just has to be. And that also includes how you navigate the world. Doesn't mean that everybody else is going to navigate the world that way. And just because you decided to sacrifice your wellness, whatever degree or dimension of wellness that may be, does not mean that everyone else should do that. And it doesn't mean that everyone else has the capacity to do that. And it also doesn't mean that it also doesn't mean that you should do that either. Right. I think about like, I think of like my grandfather, my grandparent, both of my grandfathers, they did not finish middle school. They were sharecropping in Mississippi. They were trying, they were working. Now, so the rugged individualism that I have is really a byproduct of slavery, right? And racism. So black folks, black and brown people, that individualism is like a form of navigating and overcoming oppression and being resilient because we don't have anybody but us. At the same time, paired with that I also learned from my grandparents, and then the legacy of my grandparents and of course my parents, is an idea of community. Because hey, we ain't all got it like that. So we got to work together and figure out how to practice some type of collective power organizing so we can continue forward. That collective power organizing might be between me and my uncles and aunties and my cousins. That might be between, but there's this notion, I think, of you got to figure it out by yourself. Hey, it's you against everybody. And it's like, that comes back to bite us in moments like this around disability.
Yes, absolutely. I'm actually thinking about my mom. So my mom, she had peripheral artery disease, and eventually to peripheral artery disease, and she had an arrhythmia, and the combination of a variety of those different things led to her having a massive stroke, which is what ended her life. And there was probably a period of about 6 to 8 years definitely the last 3 or 4, where she was in an immense amount of pain almost daily as a result of the peripheral artery disease. But when you looked at her, you were like, people would be like, your mama look good for 77. Like, all right, okay, Miss Burt, right? And I knew how much pain she was in. Sometimes I could hear it in her voice. Sometimes I can sort of catch up on the fact that like she just didn't have as much tolerance, or like she wasn't fully showing up right in her fullness. And there were a handful of moments where she sort of let me in, and she had a lot of like regret and anger and resentment and just heaviness around not being able to move through the world in the way that she wanted. And whenever I try to talk to her about assistance, about assistive devices, about making some lifestyle changes, about asking for help, no, I got it. I can't let it stop me, right? So I think that, that intersection sometimes of all these aspects of identity, sometimes they come together in a way that help us stay above the fray, or keep us connected in helpful ways, or help us even learn to navigate and be resilient in ways that the mainstream cannot. And then sometimes I think they come together in a way that actually lead to 100%. Our deficit, right? And so we used to have so many conversations around, Mama, you asking for assistance or getting assistive devices isn't you not being able to take care of yourself. That's not you. She was like, I'm not ready to give up yet. That's not you giving up. That's not you giving in. That is you learning to work smarter, not harder. But no, she would get her in pain, not very nimble, 75, 76 old year tail up to the attic to get. I got to get my Christmas decorations.
You don't have
down,
to do
right?
that. Like we can, and let's say if you were fully able-bodied, like you also 70 something years old. Can I help you, please? Just like irrespective of how healthy, right?
Please
it's okay. And I think like that's so true, because to your point, right? There's an element of when you think about invisible disability, like so for me, like me being diagnosed with depression and PTSD, right? And me not even advocating for myself on, hey, I just need a day. Hey, I just need you to back up for a second so I can process a few things. Hey, I need help. And like, even like the more like the like lowest common is not even like me asking you to help me. It's just asking for space for me to help me. Right. Even, and so there's a belief of like, I just got to keep on going because I can just keep pushing. I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna make it work. And it's like, look, there's certain elements of that can be good. At the same time, to your point, like it is also, there's no shame. And I think that's what I had to realize when it comes to like, so like, and I said, Dr. Coleman, you know me, it's like, I'm always going to defer to challenging institutions before I look at individual responsibility, but there's both, right? So on the individual responsibility side, it's like, okay, you have to come to peace with the fact that there's no shame in you asking or advocating for yourself to create space for yourself to get the things that you need, especially if you know what you need, right? If you're privileged enough to know what you need or self-aware enough to know what you need, you should go do that. Right. Let's talk a little bit though about what institutions can do and organizations can do to help create the psychological safety, the environment to which people with invisible disabilities can, one, be honest about that, and also create an environment where they can be successful without having to sacrifice parts of themselves.
Correct. So one, I think just like with many other of the indices of individual identity that like falls under that DEI umbrella, right? It's like, yeah, you could limit your DEI initiatives around how much you are sort of hiring equitably and diverse, right? Like you could limit it to whatever the sort of, let your ceiling be the floor for whatever is required legally. Or, as we know, over the past 20 years, organizations to some varying degrees have been really trying to be more robust than that, more expansive than that, and say, what are the other things that we can look at beyond sort of this baseline? I think disabilities is like if they are above the baseline is like, a millimeter above, right? And so one, I think, is really starting to move beyond just ERGs around different abilities, but thinking more intersectionally around identity and ability. I think thinking more expansively around just the notion that invisible disabilities are very real and exist, but also being hyper aware that the stigma is a huge barrier for folks. And so I think institutions need to be thinking differently and creatively around how to create like actual safe spaces for folks to come forward and to have really nuanced conversations around how it shows up for themselves. So I think the other piece that makes invisible disabilities more complex, and I will acknowledge that, right? I think it makes it more complex because what the functional limitations might look like for you at any given point in the continuum, given the other responsibilities, stressors, or the contextual factors in your life can change, right? It's not a one-to-one. It's not as if when you are immobile, you need an assistive device, period, full stop. It's not a one and done, right? So that looks different. And then it also looks different across individuals. So I think it requires institutions to really think about how do we maximize a like flexible framework within some actual standards, measurable standards that can be replicated across multiple components of the organization. I think it has to be set aside as different in that way because of how much individual difference and nuance there can be with regard to invisible disabilities in specific.
So then, when we talk about, the idea of invisible disability, especially at the intersection of race, what are things that you believe executives of race and gender, frankly? So let's talk about I think about this. We've had conversations outside of the pod about this idea of neurodivergence and the term itself. Mm-hmm. And I've heard, and I feel like there's this there's a contracting and expanding definition of the term, or rather, what conditions qualify for neurodivergence. Let me be intentional, more accurate in my words. And so I remember, and I still have the question of, okay, so neurodivergence, a lot of people would say neurodivergence is a form of invisible disability. And then it's okay, well, is depression neurodivergence? Is PTSD neurodivergence? ADHD neurodivergence? And so here we go. I'm laying all the context. All right. So
right.
I believe in talking to a lot of Black academics, specifically Black and brown folks in the mental health space, that Black and brown people suffer from depression at rates that are higher than one may assume, and are oftentimes under or undiagnosed. And that depression and depression and things associated with depression can be exacerbated by certain macro and microaggressive environments. So 100%. Then the question for me is okay, so then if that's the case, then there's an argument to be made that potentially larger or significant portions of historically marginalized communities are neurodivergent. And so then what does that mean related to this whole concept of I don't want to say this culture of welcome, but when you're thinking about organizations that are trying to, I feel like if that is the case, if most if large swaths of Black and brown people are neurodivergent in this context, wouldn't that demand a different type of engagement from leaders and frankly also HR policymakers and probably insurance companies too, who can manage leaves and stuff? Am I overthinking it?
Yeah, no, I don't think you're overthinking it. So let's unpack a little bit, right? So part of why I think you see different um, uh, categorizations or more expansive versus more limited definitions around neurodivergence. One, I think is how people define it, and two, we're in this really interesting space where the technology around understanding what is actually happening in the brain in relationship to the experience of mental health or mental cognitive differences is way more robust and evolving than 15 years ago, and even when I was being trained. I'm trained in a treatment modality called brain spotting that was not even heard of when I was in graduate school, and like the neurological research that shows like what is happening in the brain when you use this modality and the impact of trauma. So I'm gonna put an asterisk there, right? And how that differently shapes the brain is really like it's in its very sort of explosive period, right? So the data is starting to shift how we understand and even approach mental health treatment. So if the field of mental health, right, is barely catching up, we can't begin to think about other organizations or industries, tech, to like be what are you talking about, right? So part of it is like what a mismatch in terms of knowledge and information and how that gets disseminated and then how that then shapes culture, right? That's one thing. I think particularly um, for Black folks, for folks of color, we know anti-Blackness is its own special brand of trauma and experience of structural oppression, right? So I think about the impact of racial trauma on Black folks' brain, and we know that trauma influences the brain's capacity to function, the executive functioning, in much the same way that we look at folks who have neurodiverse diagnoses such as ADHD or autism, right? That those are the two that oftentimes we're really leaning into, maybe depression, bipolar anxiety disorder, right? So if we know that the executive functioning, which is what is required to perform at a high level in any sort of corporate setting, your ability to think through, your ability to problem solve, your ability to be strategic, your ability to do long range planning, to have inhibition of impulse, right? All of these myriad things that executive functioning requires for you to show up as a full grown adult and perform is impacted by these things, quite literally, that can be measured. Then the answer obviously is yes, Zach. Like organizations should be more responsive to that, right? That makes perfect sense. But what we know in the context of power and oppression, that logic oftentimes is irrelevant to the production of a specific outcome. And the production of the specific outcome is people working harder, longer hours, producing more, making more money. And like that's the goal. So one, I think for me, we continue to run up against our good old friend like capitalism, especially in how capitalism is like this sort of voracious monster that it exists in this current place and time, right? Because if you have someone who has the same diagnoses, who is willing to sacrifice themselves, who is willing to not acknowledge the impact, who is willing to continue to perform at work to a deficit at all other parts of themselves, and then they looking at you like, well, what's your excuse?
Yeah, that's depressing. No pun intended. I think that yeah, no,
Like,
no.
and I do think that is what happens, right? Because especially so one of the things yes, I'm always thinking systems down as well, right? Like I'm always thinking about the context as well, and then the relationship of the individual. To me, the individual component always like overshadows, because at the end of the day, we have leaders, one, who are not always informed or educated about the things that are really happening in the lives of their workforce, but two, make decisions oftentimes based on their personal relationships or based on their current understanding about something. And so I think it does get distilled down to, well, if Jack can do it, why
Yeah.
can't Jill do it?
No,
Like,
I mean, and I think so. There's so much there, but you're right that I think this idea about even just what I'm realizing also is like discussions around sustainability. They also run into conflict with our late stage capitalist context. So I could say, well, look, from an employee experience perspective, you're not going to have your talent long if they just burn out. Right, there could be PR this, and
yeah.
there's litigious implications, and blah 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 blah
Mhm.
blah blah. And it's like, yeah,
Can I
yeah,
interrupt just for a second though? But also, did you hear what you say in terms of burnout? Like that is the theme. Like that's a burnout. Help employees overcome burnout. I'm here to tell you there is no science that indicates a way to overcome burnout. Like the overcoming of burnout requires that the person be able to function in a
yeah.
different context for a sustained period of time to recover. But we think we could just do a webinar, or
A
like
pizza,
give
yeah,
employees two
yeah,
mental health
pizza
days a
party,
year.
or a shirt and some other merch or Perry. I I agree with you. I'm gonna tell you like one thing I remember when you were my therapist, and we had a conversation about me being burnt out, and I'm over here thinking, okay, I'm thinking we're gonna treat this burnout like you would like a cold. Give me something medicine or whatever, or give me some treatment, whatever the case is. Maybe I rest a little bit, but ultimately I'm gonna get back to it. And you told me something to the akin of, Zach, like the solution here is not you going back. You need to find somewhere else to be. You need a different environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then like also
Mm-hmm.
when I spoke to the next therapist and the psychiatrist, they both said the same thing, right? Like I've yet to talk to anybody in the mental health space who's ever been like, okay, here's how you can be okay. Like you need to go and it was gracious. It was y'all weren't nobody I spoke to. All of them, again, privileged. All of them were Black people, who all said, look,
Mm-hmm.
these things are going to help you navigate, but the solution is you being somewhere different. You need a different environment. Yes. And at the time, it just felt so pie in the sky to even say that. It's like, we made a different environment. This is a job. I never made this much money before. I got to do this. I got to do that. And it's like, yeah, but you got to survive. You have to live too. And so, but back to what we were talking about, like this idea of sustainability, because I would say, well, look, engaging and creating inclusive experiences for invisible and visible disabilities is just part of good business, because you're not going to retain talent for a significant amount of time if they burn out. At the same time, I say to your comment just now, as well as just this idea of sustainability, is companies aren't working on 5 to 7 year roadmaps anymore. They're working every 12 to 18 months. So if you burn out and you got to end up leaving after a year, hey, we really only planned on you being here about a year anyway. We plan on you being here max like 2, maybe 3 years. So you're probably going to be here for the first 6 to 8 months and kind of not realize you have a problem. Be another 6 months, you realize you have a problem, but you want to talk about it. There'll be like another 6 months that you realize you probably need some help. And then 3 more months, you're going to realize you burnt out, and then you're going to be gone. Great. Right. But what is disappointing about that is that it's the hamster wheel. Even as I described that, like the hamster wheel of our current system is just spinning out of control, and it's at a point where it's like, okay, I don't understand where employee experience fits in this model, and especially when I think of, and let's talk about this, and I'm gonna let you go. When I think about the future of work, right, and I think about Gen Zers coming into the market, and they are not with the play. Like,
baby, they are on a different level.
We say this about every young group of people coming into, at least.
No,
I really do believe.
I'm Gen X, so I have the sort of long view.
Right.
They different.
Right.
They are
and
different.
So like I think, and look, I think there's something to be said about a lot of this language being so accessible to people who are not practitioners
Correct.
in the space. I think there's something empowering about that. I think there's also something really potentially not dangerous, because that's the wrong word, but there's something.
I think it's short-sighted oftentimes. I think because of their youth, there's hubris that comes along with, there's arrogance that comes along with youth, there's audacity that comes along with youth, and sometimes I think it's not that level of information and maybe education is not tempered because of all of that.
100%. And so, like, but I still say that to say that's something that employers are going to have to continue to deal with, right? Like, and I get it. Like, there's a boomer generation of executives that are attaching themselves to machines to live as long as possible, but y'all ain't gonna be able to handle these Gen Zers trying to figure out like as they cite their demands and stuff, and you can sit back and fire them or throw them away if you want to. It's not gonna. You're not gonna be long. Your company isn't gonna be long if it's working the same way. So my last question to you is, let's say 3 points of advice for executive leadership groups who are trying to be mindful of invisible disabilities for their employees. What were the 3 points of advice you would give?
One is get informed, like really, really get educated and informed, and understand that difference does not mean unable, right? Or like unwilling, right? That you, to really start to wrap your brain around the fact that there may be large cohorts of your workforce that have to be engaged differently, right? The second thing related to that, I think, is to take a step back and ask what is our goal, right? Okay, we know it's making money, right? It's doing this thing. Is the goal enough, big enough, important enough for us to reconsider what might even feel like radical ways of being able to engage folks, right? I think the third piece that comes along with that is, I think, being able to really let go of, wrestle with sort of a more authoritarian approach to management, supervising of employees, right? This notion of like, you need to work this time to this time in order to be like considered on task or engaging, right? And so that folks might have to work differently, right? Just because your current systems have it set up a certain way, you might be able to get the same level of productivity contribution from some of your invisibly disabled employees, but it might not happen in the hours or in the time that you want, right? And so how do we then begin to look at metrics differently? How might we then be able to evaluate those employees differently? But it has to start specifically with really understanding, like, this is a real thing. You can't say it's not just because you can't see it, touch it, or maybe it's not your experience, or it might be part of your experience and you've just found really maladaptive ways that are hidden by your privilege to allow you to operate in the context for your own success, right?
Wow. Yeah. Dr. Nikki Coleman, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your resilience. Yeah. Thank you for the leadership and wisdom and thought-provoking perspectives that you provide on a regular basis. We look forward to having you back on Living Corporate very soon. But in the meantime, we will talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Peace, Dr.
Thanks
Coleman.
for having me, Zach. Bye.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.